Jeffrey Dahmer, known as one of America's most terrifying serial killers, Dahmer committed crimes that went beyond anything anyone could imagine. From murder to cannibalism, the things he did to his victims left the world horrified. But what really happened in Dahmer's life that led him down this dark path, and how did it finally end? In 1992, when Jeffrey Dahmer was finally sentenced to life in prison, many believed that justice had been served. He was locked away in the Columbia Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. Families of his victims and the public took some comfort in knowing he would never again walk free. But justice wasn't done the way they expected. Just 2 years after his imprisonment, Dahmer's story took an unexpected and brutal turn, one that no one saw coming. In a place where he was supposed to be locked away from society, his life came to a sudden, violent end. On the 28th of November 1994, Dahmer was attacked by a fellow inmate, Christopher Scarver, during a cleaning duty inside the prison. Scarver wasn't just any inmate. He had a reputation, a dark history, and as it turns out, his own disturbing reason for targeting Dahmer. But this was no simple prison fight. It was personal. Almost as if Scarver felt it was his duty to end Dahmer's life. But let's first have a flashback of how Dahmer ended up in jail in the first place. Dahmer's story didn't start with horror, it started with a lonely child, one who grew up battling feelings of isolation and abandonment. Yet, somewhere along the way, those dark feelings turned into dark actions, committing some of the most shocking crimes in American history, each one more disturbing than the last. Jeffrey Dahmer's first murder took place on June 18, 1978, when he was just 18 years old. Dahmer picked up a young man named Stephen Hicks, who was hitchhiking near Dahmer's childhood home in Bath, Ohio. Dahmer offered him a ride, and they drank beer together in the secluded woods. After Stephen became intoxicated, Dahmer struck him with a dumbbell, knocking him unconscious. Once Hicks was down, Dahmer strangled him to death with the same dumbbell. Afterward, Dahmer dismembered Hicks's body, cutting it into pieces and keeping the remains. He boiled the flesh off the bones and kept some of the bones as souvenirs, a chilling indication of what would come next in his killing spree. Dahmer's first murder wasn't just the beginning of his violent acts, but it also revealed the disturbing pattern that would follow in the years ahead. Well, once in an interview, Jeffrey Dahmer admitted he began having fantasies of death mingled with sex by the time he was 14 or 15 years of age, and it was at that age that he felt he was at a point of no return. Jeffrey Dahmer claimed his fantasies consisted of picking up a hitchhiker, holding him hostage, and doing whatever he wanted with him. And on Stephen's murder, he ruthlessly said all the parts were there that just made it possible to happen. Well, over the years, his methods became more disturbing and violent. In his early 20s, he moved to Milwaukee, where his horrific crimes took the lives of many unsuspecting young men, often from marginalized communities. Between 1987 and 1991, Dahmer claimed 16 more lives, bringing his total number of victims to 17. His victims included Stephen Tuomi, 28, whom he met at a Milwaukee club and lured back to his apartment. Jamie Dox Tater, 14, a runaway to whom Dahmer promised money for companionship. Anthony Sears, 24, an aspiring model who would be Dahmer's last victim before a 2-year break in his killing spree. Ernest Miller, 24, whom Dahmer lured to his apartment by offering him money. Konorak Sinthasimafon, 14, who tragically escaped only to be returned to Dahmer by police, unknowingly sealing his fate. Others included Joseph Bradhoff, 25, Oliver Lacey, 23, Jeremiah Weinberger, 23, Matt Turner, 20, Anthony Hughes, 31, Errol Lindsay, 19, Curtis Straughter, 18, David Thomas, 23, Eddie Smith, 28, Ricky Beeks, 33, and Richard Guerrero, 25. Each of these men had their own life, dreams, and story cut tragically short by Dahmer's horrific actions. His brutal acts left lasting scars on their families and communities. Well, Dahmer had a horrible pattern that he followed with almost every victim. He would lure young men to his apartment where he would drug them, making them helpless before murdering them. But his cruelty didn't end there. Dahmer would go on to dismember their bodies, sometimes dissolving parts of them in acid to erase any trace of evidence. He even kept skulls as souvenirs, and in some cases, he even ate parts of his victims. This horrific act earned him the name the Milwaukee Cannibal. His reign of terror finally ended in 1991 when he had lured another young man, Tracy Edwards, to his apartment, hoping to make him his next victim. But this time, things didn't go as planned. Tracy sensed that something was terribly wrong, and, in a moment of courage, managed to escape from Dahmer's apartment. He ran down the street, terrified, until he found two police officers and flagged them down. When police entered Dahmer's apartment, they were completely unprepared for what they would find. It was beyond belief. They opened his freezer and found about 4 or 5 preserved, decapitated heads. Pots and pans in his kitchen held dismembered body parts, as if they were ordinary items. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery was in a large tank, torsos that Dahmer had tried to dissolve using acid. But this wasn't just a crime scene. It was a window into Dahmer's darkest secrets and horrible mind, finally exposed for the world to see. So, finally, Dahmer was arrested on July 22, 1991, marking the end of his horrific killing spree. In court, Dahmer confessed to his crimes, but pleaded guilty by reason of insanity. However, the jury found him legally sane, sentencing him to 15 consecutive life terms. In prison, Dahmer's life was far from easy. Due to the severity of his crimes, he was initially placed in isolation. However, after a year, he requested to be moved to a less restricted area where he could interact with other inmates and participate in activities. Dahmer started attending religious services, even requesting to be baptized. Some reports indicated that he began showing remorse for his actions, speaking with prison minister Roy Ratcliffe about the crimes he committed. Yet despite his apparent spiritual transformation, Dahmer's disturbing behavior didn't end. He reportedly made unsettling jokes about cannibalism to his fellow inmates, claiming he would bite them, and he would even mold his foot into shapes resembling dismembered body parts, using ketchup as a stand-in for blood. These actions understandably angered and frightened other prisoners, particularly one inmate who would later bring Dahmer's life to a brutal end, Christopher Scarver. Christopher Scarver was no stranger to the system. He had his own troubled past. A Milwaukee native, he joined a youth conservation program in his early years where he trained as a carpenter. Unfortunately, life took a dark turn when, during an argument over unpaid wages, Scarver shot and killed his former boss, Steve Lohman. Afterward, he demanded money from another individual present before fleeing the scene. The police soon found him, and he was sentenced to life in prison for murder in 1992, around the same time Dahmer began serving his sentence. Though both men were in prison for terrible crimes, Scarver saw Dahmer as particularly evil. He was disgusted with Dahmer's lack of respect for his victims, even while behind bars. Dahmer's dark jokes and strange behavior annoyed many inmates, including Scarver. Dahmer had narrowly escaped an earlier attack when inmate Osvaldo Dorothy tried to slit his throat with a razor hidden in a toothbrush. Well, Scarver couldn't understand how Dahmer could joke about murder and cannibalism. Scarver avoided him until one day in November 1994. Dahmer, Scarver, and another inmate, Jesse Anderson, were assigned to clean the bathrooms in the prison's gym area. Scarver later claimed that while they were working, someone poked him in the back. When he turned, he found Dahmer and Anderson laughing. Feeling humiliated and enraged, Scarver didn't react immediately. But once Dahmer went into the locker room alone, Scarver seized his chance. He retrieved a metal bar from a piece of exercise equipment and followed Dahmer. Inside the locker room, Scarver snapped. With a sudden, violent burst of rage, he grabbed a metal bar and struck Dahmer hard. According to Scarver, he believed that Dahmer's actions in life were unforgivable and he didn't think he deserved to live. Dahmer was rushed to the hospital, but died from his injuries. Scarver didn't try to escape or hide what he had done. When guards found him near the crime scene still holding the metal bar, he openly admitted to killing Dahmer and Anderson. He explained why he did it, making it clear that he saw no redemption for their crimes. Did you connect the dots here? Dahmer killed his first victim with a dumbbell, and years later, he met his end in the same way, struck by a metal bar. When Scarver was asked why he attacked Dahmer and Anderson, he said it was a mix of personal anger and a sense of duty for justice. Dahmer's crimes were so brutal, and Scarver felt Dahmer didn't deserve to live. He believed it was his responsibility to end Dahmer's life. Scarver also thought Dahmer showed no real remorse, despite his claims of finding religion and repenting. News of Dahmer's death spread quickly, and people had mixed reactions. Some felt a sense of justice, believing Scarver's actions were just another part of the punishment Dahmer deserved but never truly got. Others were disturbed by the violence of the act, seeing it as a sign of how little control there is in the prison system. The families of Dahmer's victims also had different responses. Some felt that Dahmer's death gave them a sense of closure, while others couldn't decide how they felt about him being murdered. But the question remains: did Dahmer's punishment feel complete, or did he deserve to live out the rest of his life behind bars, facing the horror of each day with the weight of his actions haunting him? Well, the prison officials speculated on why Scarver, in particular, was the one to take action. Some reports suggested that guards might have been aware of Scarver's hatred toward Dahmer. While this theory is speculative, what's clear is that Scarver had been deeply disturbed by Dahmer's behavior. In the end, Scarver was charged with 2 additional counts of murder for killing Dahmer and Anderson, further solidifying his life sentence without the possibility of parole. Scarver is still alive today, living in a medium-security prison in Wisconsin. He's made the most of his time by writing poetry, songs, short stories, and even creating art. His book, The Child Left Behind, published in 2015, and other poetry collections are available on Amazon. He also kept a close relationship with his son throughout the years. And just like anybody else, he has big goals too. He wants to study mechanical and electrical engineering through the American Prisoner Repatriation Act. Even from behind bars, he's working to build a better future. And that's where this story ends. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel.